Welcome. I'm Rabbi Julia Andelman, Director of Community Engagement at JTS, and I'm so pleased that you've joined us for this special pre-Shavuot webinar today. One of the things that some of us will miss, those who are accustomed to going to synagogue services on Shavuot, is the reading of the Ten Commandments. And we thought, what a perfect opportunity. We have an outstanding scholar who has actually been teaching courses for us, in-depth courses on the Ten Commandments for several years now. What a great opportunity to encapsulate that in webinar form, and not only look at the Ten Commandments for their meaning, their origins, their contemporary relevance, but in addition to that, their very contemporary relevance for these COVID times. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and I'm so pleased that that Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Diamond has joined us to share his expertise and his wisdom. Before we start, just a few announcements. So here's our game plan. We're going to be, Rabbi Diamond and I are going to be speaking a bit in generalities about the significance of the Ten Commandments, then going through the commandments sort of in order, here and there, skipping when it feels organic to do so. But we'll touch on all 10 and certainly some in more depth than others. Then we'll step back and talk about some of the, kind of summarize some of the general themes that we've drawn from our discussion, and then we're going to open it to Q&A from you, or comments as well. To do that for the Q&A period at the end, we're going to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. So just so you know where that is, if you click on participants down at the bottom of your Zoom panel, a little hand icon should come up. So that's how you'll raise your hand. To lower your hand, you click that icon again. Feel free to practice it now. And if you're on the phone and you'd like to ask a question, you can dial *9 to raise or lower your hand. So we will call on you when it's your turn. And I'm not sure if we have the newly updated where we are in terms of our Zoom versions. I know that they've just eliminated the ability to remotely unmute someone. So if we're already at that point, so then when we call on you, then please go ahead and unmute yourself so that we can hear you ask your question. I also just wanted to say a quick note about screen sharing. Let me show you exactly what we're talking about here. So you should hopefully see my nod if you see the Ten Commandments there at the beginning. Yes, okay. So you should see a vertical line with faces, or my face on one side, and the text that we're sharing on the other side. And you can feel free to just click on that line and drag it in one direction or the other if you want to make the text bigger or the face bigger. So I think that's all of the announcements we need to share before we begin with content. Did I miss anything, Tim? I want to acknowledge Rabbi Tim Bernard, our Director of Digital Learning, who's here helping to facilitate the webinar. I think I got everything. The one thing I did not do, and I'm going to skip it for the interest of time, is actually to formally introduce Rabbi Diamond. I'm pasting his bio here in the chat for you, and he's a modest guy, so he will not mind that I'm not reading the whole thing, but he's the Rabbi Judah Andelman Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS, a beloved teacher of JTS students who teaches not only Rabbinics, but much more, as you will soon see today. Rabbi Diamond, you ready to begin?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so why don't we start out by talking about why are the Ten Commandments so significant? How have they accrued this tremendous significance over the course of time? And kind of the flip side of that question, are they really so significant? Are they more important than the other mitzvot, the other commandments of the Torah?
So I'm going to start with the last thing that you said. More important is not description that I would want to use. Central, I think, is a better term. Historically, it's clear from Exodus 20 that part of what the revelation was about was to make clear to the people that God actually spoke to Moses, and so that when Moses was speaking, they could believe and trust that Moses was conveying the words of God. But as far as the content itself is concerned, Professor Moshe Weinfeld makes a number of points. And I was just thinking today that one of his points really is symbolized by the screen in front of all of us, which is that we are a group, but we're all in individual places. And what I mean by that is one of the things that's interesting about the Ten Commandments is that they are formulated in the singular, not lo tirtzahu in the plural, but lo tirtzach. And added to that is that the initial statement is Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'elu lemor. There's no specific addressee. God speaks these things as follows. Who's the addressee? It's no specific person. It's everyone. So, sorry. Okay. And why are these commandments that have to be addressed to everyone? Because, as the scholar Len Fuller says, he speaks about the duty of the morality of duty and morality of aspiration. And the morality of duty is what people need to do to be part of a civilized society. I'm in trouble here. Okay, to be part of a civilized society. To be part of a civilized society, you have to abide by the rules contained in the Ten Commandments. These are not phrased as commandments in the Torah sometimes as conditional. If the following happens, then here's the law. Because these rules apply always and unconditionally. This is the basis, the Torah tells us, for the Israelite society and for every society. For a society to be sustainable and to be worthy of the name of society, of civilized society, these are the commandments. And we'll talk more about why that's so, but I think that's the basic point.
Great. You just reminded me, I forgot one little announcement. If you would like to see just the speaker rather than the whole sea of faces, you can click up where it says speaker view, and that will just highlight the person speaking. If you'd rather see everyone, you can go back to gallery view, but it might be helpful to focus on speaker view. Okay, thank you. So let's dive in, and I wanted to just note for people, we're not going to get too hung up on the enumeration of, which commandment is which, what number is one, what number is two, but because there are some different versions of that, but we do want to touch upon that for a second. So Rabbi Diamond, many scholars believe that this, what we refer to often as the first commandment, is actually, as you wrote here on your source sheet, a prologue that really frames everything to come after it. Can you speak to us about this commandment / prologue and kind of explain that theory to us?
Sure. And you'll notice that I titled these, what we usually call the 10 Commandments, as the 10 utterances, because the Torah describes them as Aseret Hadvarim. Okay? Not here, but elsewhere. So, sort of hedging my bets here by not saying this is commandment 1, but these are the utterances. And the first one, it is generally said, is the statement that I would put it in two different ways. In context, it's saying, I have the authority to command you because I took you out of Egypt. That's what entitles me to ask your fidelity and obedience. It's a covenant, and we have entered into the covenant because of my saving actions, my redemptive actions, and you in turn have to serve me. But I'd also like to suggest, and maybe this is a little bit of drash, but I think it's worth saying and considering, that this tells us who God is. God is a God who hates oppression. God is a God who sees people oppressed and saves them from that state of servitude. And in a certain way, everything that follows fits in with that theme. That the Aseret HaDibrot speak to the integrity of each and every human being, and especially in the last 5 commandments, the obligation not to intrude on the integrity, the boundaries that separate us from other human beings, not to dominate or oppress other human beings. And God is telling us, that's who I am. That's how you've encountered me. That's how you as a people encountered me. Now I want to explain to you how you should live lives of that type.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through the next few a little bit more quickly, and then focus in some more depth. Once we get to the juicy commandment of honoring your parents, but let's go ahead with. Sorry. I'm not sure if all of this is visible on the screen. If I need to, sorry. Just
Okay,
change one little thing.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to be able to see it. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that.
So actually,
if you're on the phone, just so you know, all that we're sharing is the text of the 10 utterances. So if you have a Bible or some other source, there's nothing. You don't need to rely on what we're sharing on the screen.
it's in Exodus chapter 20. So we have, you shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image. You shall not bow down to them. And then God explains, and this is because I'm an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children. I'm going to leave that aside. That's theologically complicated. But this is about fidelity. This is about God saying, if I am your God, if we are entering into a covenant, one of the things that's true about a covenant is that we have to be faithful to it. And that's the difference between a partnership and a covenant. Partnership is based on self-interest. Why do I go into business with you? Well, you're in business with me because you think you're going to make money. I'm in business with you because I think I'm going to make money. That's not a covenant. A covenant is a commitment to some larger ideal, to some larger goal. And when you make that commitment, once you make it, the ideal and the commitment to that ideal transcends, in some ways, your personal interests. Your personal interests. And that's what these commandments are asking of us. Be dedicated to the covenant. One of the other things that this commandment includes is not to make images. There are many scholars who believe that this is referring not only to making images of other gods, but also making images of the God of Israel. That's also prohibited. And what's the problem with making images of God? One of the problems of making images of God is that you are defining God. You're defining who God is. And God is transcendent. God can't be defined. There's an interesting passage in Exodus. Let's turn to it. In Shemot, where God wants to appoint Moses to lead the people, and Moses says to God, so what name shall I give them? Who shall I say send me? And God says in verse 14, chapter 3 of Exodus, Vayomer Elohim el Moshe, Eyeh asher eyeh. Vayomer ko tomar libnei Yisrael, eyeh shlachani alichem. God says, say to them, I am eyeh asher eyeh. I will be what I will be. And I think one of the ways of understanding this is simply God is saying, I'm the only being who is eternal, like truth itself. But God is also saying, you can't say that I'm any one thing. I am many things. So to create an image of God is to define who God is. And we don't have the right to do that. And there's a danger in doing that, because then we choose the God, then it's the God of our choosing. This is who I want God to be. And this particular image represents who God is. That's not within our power. That shows a lack of humility. And we need to have that humility in God's presence to know that who God is and what God is ultimately transcends any ideas that we have about God.
So just to follow up on that, and I apologize, there's noise on my end because every single lawn in my neighborhood is being mowed at this moment. So I'm going to go back to muting when I'm not talking.
My neighborhood's only half the lawn, so it's not.
So how much freedom does that give people to understand God in a way that works for them, which is, I think, a way that we like to talk these days?
So I would say that there's a dialectic here. That is, because God is Eyeh Asher Eyeh, we are free to imagine God in many different ways. But also because God is Eyeh Asher Eyeh, any way of thinking about God does not include the totality of who God is. So obviously we have to have some idea of God. The Christian theologian C.S. Lewis said that he once was speaking to a woman who came from a home in which her parents were very strict about not describing God and imagining God in any way. So C.S. Lewis says to her, well, you must have imagined something, right? What was in your head when you thought about God? She said, a giant bowl of tapioca. And that's not a very inspiring way of thinking about God. So you have to have something, right? You have to have something in your head. And so we have particular ideas, but what we need to know is that's my idea. And this idea is important because it allows me to relate to God. We're just human beings. We need something more concrete, at least a metaphor, an image. But it's not the totality. And part of what this means is, if I imagine, well, this is what God wants, I know what God wants because God is X, I can say, so it seems to me, and in the end I have to make a choice, but I also always have to be open to the possibility that my image and my understanding is limited and maybe wrong. And so both of those things are true. I'm not hearing you.
Okay, let's talk about the next commandment. So, and I think this one is maybe harder for us to get these days, where we don't go around making oaths and vows. So how are we to understand? Sorry. How are we to understand this one?
Okay. So, the good thing about teaching is you learn something. And as this was approaching and I was thinking more about what we're doing here, I tried to think about these commandments in terms of our present situation and how they speak to the present situation. And lo tisah Shem Hashem Elokecha v'ashav, not to use God's name falsely, means, among other things, and it's related to what I was just talking about. It is to manipulate God, to say, I know what God says, and to make that claim to others. And I think that that's very relevant because that applies not only to God, but also to human beings. So if we misrepresent what other people say, we misrepresent their words or we misrepresent their ideas, that I think is the human equivalent of using God's name in vain. And I don't need to spell it out. just to say that that is a problem. And again, in relationship to God, I mean, one of the applications, I think, not necessarily in our society, but in its original context, is you can pray to God, or you can try to use magic and manipulate God to do what it is that you want God to do. And this is part of having a respectful, humble relationship with God, and to pray to God, to ask, but not to try to manipulate. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to now talk about Shabbat, and this is probably the last commandment that we'll do in brief like this, and then we're going to delve a little more deeply in.
So actually, yeah. Do you want to say something, Julia?
No.
Okay. So actually, I think it's very important to understand the ethical aspect of this commandment. Notice that we're commanded, arguably, this is not descriptive, but prescriptive. When we're told 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, the Torah is telling us we're supposed to have a productive life. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, why is the creation story at the very beginning of the Torah? Okay, of course, why? There are many answers. But his answer is, the Torah tells us that we are supposed to follow in God's ways. God is a creator. We, as God's creations, are also supposed to create. So in a certain sense, Sheshet Yamim Tavod is commanding us. We're supposed to be using our time productively. Then Shabbat comes, and we're told, the seventh day is the Shabbat of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your cattle, your stranger is within your settlements. In other words, although we live in a hierarchical society, don't live in a totally egalitarian society, and there is very often a power imbalance, Shabbat reminds us that there are limits to the degree to which we can exercise power over others. So when Shabbat comes, everyone can claim, worker can claim to employee, this is Shabbat. You cannot impose work upon me. And I think about that now when I think about people who are being told that they have to return to work, even though there are dangerous conditions. And I think that the message, one of the messages of this commandment is that we have a moral and ethical commandment to take seriously people's need to be healthy and their right not to work in conditions that are dangerous. We may be their employers, we're not their masters, they're not our slaves.
Do you want to go to Kabet Avicha Vatimecha, or do you want to sort of go from what you just said to one of the later ones that fleshes out that theme?
Oh, well, we'll come back to that theme. Here's what I would say, and this is not my original idea. The first commandments are about the hierarchical relationship between God and the people, and between parents and children, which is also a hierarchical relationship. The 6 through 10 are about peer relationships. And basically, the same theme runs throughout, which is to respect the other, to respect God, and to show fidelity to the relationship, which is another theme in the second 5. And so in the second 5, it's peer relationships. So Kabed Avicha V'Timecha is sort of a hinge commandment because it involves a hierarchical relationship, but it's also a human relationship. And one of the things I was thinking about what is Kabed Avicha V'Timecha in our time. And there's an interesting passage in the Jerusalem Talmud, in Tractate Peah, which says as follows. It says, sometimes you can feed your parent the best possible food and be an evil person, And sometimes you can tell your parent that the parent has to work at a mill and you can be a good person. So of course that's counterintuitive, and the Talmud says, what do I mean? It tells the story of someone who is giving wonderful food to the parent, and the parent says, son, where did you get that food? And the child replies, you know what? When dogs are given food, they don't ask questions. They just eat. Just eat your food. Don't ask me questions. The second story is someone who knows that the government is going to send a corvée. It's going to go around and force people into labor for the king. And so the son says to the father, the parent to the child, why don't you take my place at the mill? Because if you do that, then you won't have to go into forced labor. So why am I mentioning that now? Because sometimes what constitutes respecting parents can be complicated. And today, I think what's complicated for many of us is that we have to respect our parents by distancing ourselves from our parents. We want to be with them, but we know that if we are with them, at least under certain circumstances, we endanger their lives. So we have to find a way of balancing our love for them or wanting to be close to them with our respect for their well-being. We're very fortunate, Shelley and I, that my father is sheltering with us. And that also has its complications, as parent-child relationships always do. I think there are complications now that perhaps don't always apply. So kibud av v'aim, I think, is really important now.
I think it's an intense thing, an intense question for a lot of people now, and playing out so differently depending on your living situation and your parents' living situation. And when your parents are not with you or parent, it puts a heavy burden on technology. I mean, really, the sole burden is on. I mean, you're taking the initiative, but kind of almost the only way to honor is through technology. And I think that's hard. I mean, that's a hard aspect of being forced to relate to everyone outside of our homes right now. But I think it's especially hard when, when something as central to our lives as a parent is confined.
And on my block there is a woman whose son lives at the end of the block, and his grandchildren, and they visit with each other, but they visit at a distance. So the son is honoring the mother, but in two ways. The son is honoring the mother by visiting, and the son is honoring the mother by social distancing. So those are both part of the honor that the child is given. I told you, Julia, a story that I really like, which is that the Talmud rules that even though I have to serve my parents, I'm not obligated to lay out money to help them out. It's not that simple. There's pushback against that ruling of the Talmud. Later authorities say that doesn't seem right, and they say you still owe your parents tzedakah. But anyway, basically, there's no financial component in honoring parents. So the story goes that Rav Chaim Brisker, famous rabbi, at least in certain circles, in the 19th century, was approached by a man who said, my father is in Minsk, and he's not that well, and he wants me to visit him, but the train ticket is very expensive. And we rule that children are not obligated to lay out money in order to honor their parents. They only owe them service. So I guess that means I don't have to buy the train ticket to go visit my father. So Rav Chaim says, you're absolutely right. Now start walking. Right, so the message there is that we have to be creative about how we honor our parents. And in this situation, we find the ways to do it. One thing I will say, again, from my experience with my own parent, is that phone calls have become more important than they used to be. To find any kind of connection is really, really important.
Thank you. I just noticed that my mom is on this webinar.
Okay. Okay, so that was just kibud av va'em. You acknowledged her presence.
Yeah, so at the risk of embarrassing her, and you know, I'm dwelling on this. And so my mom recently had a birthday, and we live in the suburbs. She lives in the city. She's quarantining strictly, and so my son and I drove into the city. We positioned ourselves a block away so that we could, so that she could see us from her 14th floor kitchen window, and you know, it's very socially distanced. You know, and that meant a lot to her. And it also felt very inadequate. And you know, she's recently lost a friend, and you know, making a phone call is not adequate comfort for her. So it's I guess we need to practice some self-forgiveness also, but and recognize the limitations of the period that we're in, and like you said, be creative and do the best we can.
So I'm going to make a suggestion. Why don't we take 2 or 3 stories from people out there about their own experiences with this? Anyone interested in sharing their experience from either end, as a parent, as a child, as a grandparent?
Sure.
How's that shaking out for you?
Someone want to raise a hand and volunteer to share something?
No? Okay. Okay.
Okay. All right, so let's take a turn here to the next command, which is a bit different. Lo tirzach, you shall not kill.
Okay. So this commandment has a very interesting history. First of all, you'll notice my translation, which actually is the King James translation. It's thou shalt not, but same difference. If you look in the new JPS translation, you'll see that the translation is you shall not murder. But the fact is, so what does it mean to translate as you shall not murder? What you're really saying is there are types of killing that are okay, and there are types of killing that are not okay, and you want to distinguish them by using a different term to describe each one. But the fact is that root, lo tirtzach, is used in the Torah to describe, let's call it state execution. So that in Numbers chapter 35, verse 30, the Torah says, if anyone kills a person, well, let me read the original, because JPS. So, kol makeh nefesh lefi edim yirtzach et harotzeach. Anyone who strikes someone else, kills someone else, there have to be witnesses to that, and then yirtzach et harotzeach, meaning the court kills the killer. Now, the JPS translation tries to get away from that equivalence. It translates it as the manslayer may be executed. So it wants to use 2 different words for the same verb. But the truth is, killing is killing. It's true that in certain cases the Torah says that killing is okay, but we need to know that whenever we're killing, we're doing the same thing as a murderer. We're taking a life. And that means that we have to be very careful before we decide to do that. And of course, famously, there's a rabbinic view that we should not take life at all. We should not have capital punishment. But I wanted to say something else about lo tirtzach. I think lo tirtzach is very, very relevant today. I mean, we've all read about overwhelmed hospitals in New York, and we've all read about situations where there are limited resources. So these doctors are facing the question of lo tirtzach. When do I take resources away from someone who is extremely ill, and let's say there are not enough ventilators to go around? Do I take the ventilator away from someone whose prognosis is very poor and give it to someone else who is younger, has a better prognosis? I'm not going to try to answer the question. But the doctors who have to face these decisions are facing lo tirtzach decisions, because they are potentially taking away life, even if a person has only a short time left to live. If you take away those resources, in a certain sense, that constitutes lo tirtzach. And I don't say that to criticize them. On the contrary, I say that to emphasize the enormity of the decision that doctors have to make. And at all points, I have to have in my head, when I'm in that position, lo tirtzach. Taking a life is wrong and a terrible thing, even if sometimes I, in effect, have to do that. There's something else about lo tirtzach which is really important. So I mentioned before what Lenz Fuller said about the morality of duty and the morality of aspiration. So the Ten Commandments are basically the minimum that we have to do to live in a civilized society. But there's also, Fuller says, the morality of aspiration. In other words, if we really understand these commandments, we understand that when the Torah says you shall not kill, that literally killing is not the totality of what the Torah wants from us, of what we should aspire to. Anything that we do that could lead to death is included. And if I aspire to fulfill this commandment in its fullness, then I have to think about other cases where I might be, in effect, the rotzeach. There's a passage in Deuteronomy about the eglah arufah, the broken-necked calf. This is a situation where a corpse is discovered and nobody knows who the murderer is. And so there's a ritual. The ritual is you bring a heifer to the place where you found the corpse, and you break the heifer's neck. Who does the heifer represent? Does it represent the victim? Does it represent the killer? Does it represent the community? It represents one or all of the above. But then the elders of the nearest town have to come, wash their hands, and say, Yadeinu lo shavchu et hadam hazeh. Our hands have not spilled this blood. So the rabbis are amazed. They say, what do you mean? Do we really think that the elders of the town are the murderers, such that we demand of them that they declare their innocence? The rabbis explain it as follows. What they're saying is, when this person was in our town, we provided for this person. When this person left the town, we accompanied the person to make sure that the person had safe passage. In other words, there are a lot of different ways that you can kill somebody other than taking a gun and shooting them. And one of the ways that you can kill people is by denying them their basic needs. And again, I don't have to spell it out. This is a very relevant question. And I'm going to say the following without any intention of getting into politics, although inevitably it might be understood as such. But I'm going to say it anyway. That when we're talking about saving lives now, we need to understand that that has two aspects to it. So one is literally, we have to protect ourselves and others from the coronavirus. But the commandment of lo tirtzach and that rabbinic gloss also tells us that if the result of the shutdown is that people are in financial need and some don't have their basic necessities, then without saying that we have to reopen or not, but in some way the society needs to say that part of saving life in this situation is looking after those who are in need or less fortunate. I can't just shelter in my home and say, I'm okay and I have a job and I wish the other people well, and what we're doing for those other people is we're shutting down. That's not enough. We also have to think about those people's, economic well-being and their very lives. And I would say that includes what we ask of people, the kinds of work that we ask people to do, and the protections that we give them. Because if people are not receiving adequate protections, that's in there. That's in the low tirzach category. And in general, I hope what's coming through here is that when we study Torah and we look at commandments, we always need Torah means guidance. So the question that I always try to ask myself when I'm studying is, how does this speak to me? And what are all the ways in which this speaks to me? It isn't just what it literally says. It's also what it implies. And the question has to be asked. Now, we can disagree about what the application should be under the present circumstances, but we need to know that the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, are speaking to us, to each and every one of us, and they're saying, ask yourself that question. Are you not a Rotzeach? Are you not aiding and abetting Rotzchim? We want to make sure that that's the case, the best of our ability.
What's so hard about this commandment right now is there's a sense of helplessness that if you try to save a life in one way, then you're harming or potentially costing in another way. I think someone asked in the chat about, a specific question about the ethics of this in hospitals, and I want to commend to people our colleague Rabbi Danny Nevin's recent responsum for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the halachic Jewish legal authority for the conservative movement. But reading Rabbi Nevin's tshuva, it's an awful read, I have to say, because you're just there are these impossible situations. Imagining being a medical worker in a hospital, and how on earth are you supposed to weigh this person's life against this person's life? And the tshuva, the responsum, is trying to take some of that burden off of the physician and give guidance. But the burden is still there. The idea that some way or another I'm going to be a rotzeach, and I think that I think the same is true of society as a whole right now, as you were talking about. Right, there's, of course, we all know that there are gradations. It's not just reopen everything or shut down everything, and we're trying to figure out where to find the in-between safely and getting guidance on that from experts. But there are trade-offs, right? And every policy has a trade-off, and saving someone in one way can put someone else at risk in another way.
It is important to say, Julia, that there's another side of the coin, as of course in rabbinic thinking there always is, in life there always is. So the Talmud in Bava Metzia describes the following case. There are two people in the desert, and one of them has a canteen. And if this person drinks all of the water, that person likely will make it to civilization and survive, whereas the other one obviously will die if that person gets no water whatsoever. So do I, the person with the canteen, have the obligation to give half of my water to the other individual? A rabbi with the somewhat mysterious name of Ben Petura, it doesn't appear elsewhere, says, yes, you have to give half of your water to the other person. Now, commentators, there are different ways of understanding it. I want to go with the following understanding, which is, it's not a case where it's crystal clear that if I give half my water to the other person, we're both going to die. The situation is, if I give half my water to the other person, my odds of survival are reduced significantly, but there's still a possibility that both of us will survive and reach civilization. Whereas if I don't give water, my chances of survival, the person with the canteen, are much better. Rabbi Akiva says, Chayecha kodmin. My life comes first. If I have the water and the other person doesn't have any water, this is a terrible choice no matter what, but I keep the water for myself. The relevance of this debate is I'm a doctor and I am in a COVID ward. How far do I have to go in risking my own life to do my best to save the lives of others? I mean, this is a real choice that people have to make. We have someone in our community who works with COVID patients. His in-laws lived with him, and they both died of COVID. Now, it's not definite that this was the result of his bringing the virus into the home, but it's certainly a possibility. Certainly he stays up nights wondering about that. Again, it's not my job to say what is right or what is wrong, but that is also something that has to be considered. How far do I need to go? To what degree do I have to risk my own life to save the lives of others? Not an easily answered question. So to put it another way, Lo Tirtzach includes me.
Right.
Okay? I shouldn't kill myself either.
So we could spend the whole rest of our time on this, but we're going to keep going in the interest of time. And the next few are, I think you have some really interesting things to share, although we'll do it a little bit more briefly than we did the last couple.
Okay, I'll take that as an advisement and I'll do my best to follow it. So since Julia and I had our previous conversation, also known as Rabbi Andelman, but we're friends, so I'm going to say Julia. I was thinking about lo tinaf, right? Do not commit adultery, in the context of the Me Too issue. Because what is adultery? Adultery is, again, violating boundaries. It's violating the boundaries of a relationship. And from both sides, right? If the person outside a marriage who is having an affair with someone in the marriage is violating the boundary of that relationship. And the person inside the relationship is bringing someone across the border, as it was, putting another person in the bed, which is also a violation of the parameters of that relationship. But when sexual boundaries are violated, we know that one of the ways that happens is when there's a power imbalance, and where it is not necessarily a choice on the part of one of the parties to engage in that relationship. And I was thinking of the story of King David. Right? You remember the story of King David in Bathsheba, where he sees her bathing on the roof, a beautiful woman, and he wants her, and he's the king. And if you're the king, you get what you want. And he brings her into the palace, and eventually he engages in a cover-up, right? What he tries to do, because she becomes pregnant. So how does he cover up? How can he cover up the fact that he had a sexual relationship with Bathsheba? So he tries to get her husband, Uriah the Hittite, Uriah Hitti, who is in his army, to, when he's home on leave, to spend time with Bathsheba, and then it will be plausible that the child is Uriah's and not David's. And Uriah, for whatever reason, maybe because he suspects what's going on, says, no, we're in a state of war, I'm not going home. So David's in a fix here. So what does he do? He tells one of his generals, he tells Yoav, when you go out to war, make sure that Uriah gets positioned in a dangerous place, and then everyone else should withdraw, and that way Uriah will be killed in battle. And that's exactly what happened. So here we have it. We have a sexual violation and a cover-up, both. And that is something we see all too often in our own society. That Lo Tinaf, whatever else Lo Tinaf teaches us, it teaches us that that is a violation of the integrity of relationships and of other people.
So in the next commandment, Lo Tivnov, you have, I think, a very different type of violation to share with us.
Yeah, so what we were talking about was that, again, this comes back to the idea that I expressed earlier, that we need to understand the full implications of each one of these commandments. So we understand that lo tigno basically means if an object, if something belongs to someone else, do not take it for yourself. But there are different ways of stealing, and there are different things that one can steal from others. And the rabbis develop an idea of gnevat da'at, that one of the things that I can steal from other people is the knowledge to which they are entitled. That is a form of theft. And again, if we think about the world in which we live, what information are citizens entitled to? Is there information that can legitimately be withheld? Or is that gnevat da'at? Is that denying information to which any citizen, all people living in this country are entitled? Again, I'm trying to be careful. I have my own political point of view, and to some extent probably coming through. But I really want to make sure that we all understand that I'm not dictating the answer to these questions, but I am saying the questions have to be asked. You know, if you don't ask the question, you're never going to think about what the answer might be. So this is a very real answer in our society at present. What information can be withheld and what information belongs in the public domain?
I think what you said made me think also about we all know from all of the data and publicity around the last election how, and just from our lives, how huge a role social media plays in the percentage of the information that we know and get in life, how much of that comes from social media. And so it actually made me think, it highlights some of the burden on us, any of us who are social media users, not only experts and people in policy-making positions, to be careful about what we share on social media, right? I know you, you know me. If one of us posts something, I'm more inclined, you and I might be more inclined to trust it because it comes from one of us. So that it behooves me then to make sure that I'm not doing gnevat da'at of yours and taking advantage or sort of not giving enough weight to that trust that you've placed in me, and I need to make sure that what I'm posting is accurate and helpful and not misleading.
Right. And by the way, another form of this is when I share confidential information in a way that you do not want me to do. I am stealing those facts that are supposed to remain, that you want to remain in your own domain, and I am taking them out into the public domain and sharing them. That's a theft. That's a theft. That's a violation of my right to my own information. And boy, in our society, is that a complicated matter? You know the phrase, the cliche, the people's right to know. Well, what do we have the right to know? Not everything that we do know, I would say, are we actually entitled to know. And so that's also part of lo tigno.
So let's briefly touch on the penultimate commandment, and then I know you want to spend more time on the last one.
So yeah, I've often said, right, the last commandment is lo tachmo, do not covet. And as I have often said, this is an example of translating one word that we don't really understand well with another word that we really don't understand well. I mean, what exactly is coveting? What do we mean by that? So part of what we need to understand about this commandment is that if I say, well, you have a beautiful coat. I wish I had a coat like that. That's not coveting. What's coveting is obsessing and ultimately doing everything I can to take from you what really is yours. And there are different ways of doing it. It doesn't have to involve stealing. I can pressure you. I can guilt you in a variety of ways. I can try to make what's yours mine. But there's something much deeper here. The rabbis note that really the basis for all of the other violations in the second 5, well, let me put it a different way, 6 through 9, okay, murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, are all ultimately the result of coveting. Why do I kill? Why do I steal? Why do I engage in adultery? Because I want something to which I'm really not entitled. And to make sure that I get it, I will testify falsely. Maimonides, at the end of his codification of the laws of coveting, the prohibition against coveting, says as follows. He says, if you want to see where coveting leads to, look at the story of Achav and Nabot. King Ahab had a neighbor. His neighbor was Nabot, and Nabot had a vineyard. And Ahab had plenty, right? He was the king, he was very wealthy, but he decided that he wanted the vineyard. And he says to Nabot, sell me your vineyard. And Nabot says, no, this is my inheritance, this belongs to my family, and I don't want to sell it. And Achav goes back to the palace and sulks like a 5-year-old. And his wife, Jezebel, says to him, don't worry, you're the king of Israel, you should get that vineyard, you're going to get it. So she arranges for false witnesses to testify falsely that Nabot was a blasphemer. As a result of this, he is stoned to death, and the property of a criminal goes to the king. So as far as Ahab is concerned, the story has a happy ending, not for Nabot, but for Ahab. So Maimonides is saying, think about this story. It starts with desire, starts with coveting. And where does it go? It goes to theft, it goes to false testimony, and it goes to murder. And if you look in chapter 3 of Genesis, I don't want to get too technical now, but in the verse in which we're told that that Eve eats from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, it uses 2 verbs. It uses the verb chet mem daled, and it uses the verb aleph vav hey. And these are the 2 verbs that are used in the 10th commandment. The first is used only in Shemot, in Exodus. The second is used in the other version of the 10 Commandments, Deuteronomy 5. I'll read the verse to you. This is chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 6. Vatera ha'isha ki tov ha'etz l'ma'achal v'chi ta'avahu le'inayim. There you have the root aleph vav hey. V'nechmad, you have the root chet mem daled, ha'etz la'haskil, vatikach mi priyo v'tochal, and so on. When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took the fruit and ate. So that means that the original sin, so to speak, is desire. That's where sin begins. The very first sin is desire. God tells Adam and Eve, you can eat from any tree. There's just one tree you can't eat from. And that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What was special about that tree? My answer, it's not only my answer, is there was nothing special about that tree. But God was telling humanity to be a human being, to live a godly life, to lead a civilized life, there have to be no's. There have to be restraints. And I'm teaching you that now. I'm teaching you that by saying there's certain things that you can't have. And that's the problem of lo tachmo. And I would just add to that, and I've spoken about this many times, that if you think about the consumerist society in which we live, one of the big problems that we face, one of the commandments that I feel collectively and individually, and I include myself in this, and I'll put myself first, we violate lo tachmod. Because what is lo tachmod? Where does lo tachmod come from? Where does desire come from? It's the opposite of what the rabbis talk about in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot, we have this sort of Jewish Zen set of Jewish Zen koans. Ben Azai, who says, or Ben Zomo says that who is wise? Person who learns from everyone. Right? There are sort of these counterintuitive answers, but when you think about them, they're actually very wise. So, right, we're told who is wealthy? The person who rejoices, not as satisfied as is sometimes translated, who rejoices in what he or she has. To have a happy life, we have to find joy in that which we have. And when we live in a world of more, yes, I have this speaker, but I need to get a better speaker. Yes, whatever it is. I'm not against getting good things, but if I find that there's this constant cycle in my life, that I acquire things, they're good for a while, then I'm dissatisfied and I need more. That, in effect, I think, is a violation of lo tachmod. And by the way, it has environmental implications. Because the more that we demand of manufacturers, the more the world's resources are used and abused and depleted. So I think lo tachmod leads us to a deep consideration of our consumerist society and the extent to which we can see ourselves as, aiding and abetting. And it also reminds us you can't really be happy if you're coveting all the time. Because if you're coveting all the time, you don't have what you want, and you're not happy with what you have. So where are you? You're nowhere.
That's a really helpful highlighting of two sides of a coin. I think for some people, for myself, this time has actually really nurtured the rejoicing in what you have. If you're privileged, which I certainly am. I've had a backyard for a number of years. Now I rejoice in that backyard. The fact that my son has a place to play, and I'm so keenly aware of many people whose children are in apartments. It's a real cause for rejoicing. And then at the same time, I actually, I know I keep referring to social media, but that's the only way I'm seeing other people these days. Right, but I see everyone's sort of beautiful lawn furniture and the pool that they just bought for the backyard and the climbing structure, and then the coveting starts to emerge. But actually, I have to say, just the pervasive sense of my knowledge that there's pervasive deprivation for so many people across the world has helped the former win out. Just a sense of how lucky and privileged I am, and how joyful I can be about what I have. So I hope that other people are finding that as well. Okay, so I wanted to just spend a few minutes kind of summing up on some of the themes that we talked about, and then we'll move to inviting people's questions. Just a couple points of information. So I was made aware, I apologize, that some people physically raised their hands before when we paused for questions and I didn't see you. There are a lot of people on the meeting, so do use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we're a lot more likely to see you if you do that. And I also wanted to say, I know that this session officially ends at 2:15 Eastern. I know that Rabbi Diamond has already, assuming this is still the case, has already told us that he's happy to stay on for more time and take more questions, and we're absolutely happy for people to do that if they want to continue the discussion. But to kind of sum up and still bring in some Q&A before the official end of the time. So we talked about, well, let me let you do it actually. Just we talked about a lot of different themes that I think I think were coming back in several of the commandments.
Yeah. So again, the overall theme, I would say, is the basis of civilized society is the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments are intended to be a basis for a civilized society, for a godly world. It is a declaration that there is an order and a purpose in the world, that there is a creator who has a vision for what the world should be as expressed in the Torah. And the basics of that vision are laid out in the Ten Commandments. And at the heart, some of the values that are at the heart of the system are fidelity in relationships, humility in terms of what we know and what we assume, and respect for the integrity and rights of others. Those are the basic values. And, as Hillel said, vidach zil gemar. The rest is really commentary. And I'll just add now, and then I'll be quiet. One of the hallmarks of the Ten Commandments is, yes, life is complicated. Yes, decisions are complicated. But at a certain level, if we lose sight of the simple and clear things, we're in trouble. So for each of these commandments, we've talked about different ways of understanding it, and sometimes the problem of when to apply it in its literal sense and not. But we should never, wander too far away from saying, at the end of the day, don't steal, don't kill, okay? Have a relationship with God. And here, I don't want to get into people's theologies, but the sense in which I want to urge it upon people is the sense in which I'm not in charge. There are powers greater than myself, or there is a power greater than myself. And I have to live in humility to that, and I have to help create an orderly world. I have to create an orderly world, help create an orderly world. So that's it in a nutshell.
What I'm taking from what you've shared for this Shavuot, when I'm not going to be in synagogue hearing these Ten Commandments read, is in lieu of that, I'm not only planning to read the text on my own at home, but I don't think I'm going to be staying up all night learning on my own, I have to confess. So instead, I think I'm going to try to let this webinar inspire me to focus in particular on these core values and think about how they play out for me today, how I can teach them and live them out more fully. So thank you.
Thank you.